it now, or we lose it!
This is the last one.
One branch. That's all we get.
We lose fingers, then feet, then each other.
Right now, you're probably sitting somewhere warm. Maybe you've got a blanket. Maybe the heater's humming in the background. You didn't even think about it this morning. You just woke up and you weren't dying. That's not normal. For most of human history, that single fact, waking up warm, was the difference between living and not living. And to get you here, to get your DNA all the way to this couch, your ancestors did things that would horrify you. Not brave things, not noble things, dark things. Things involving the bodies of the dead, the fates of the newborn, and choices no one alive today will ever have to make. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what ancient humans were willing to do to survive the cold, and why some of it might still be inside you. Let's start with the obvious danger, because you need the baseline before the horror makes sense. Ice Age Europe wasn't just chilly. Temperatures in glacial periods could sit 20, even 30 degrees Celsius colder than today. 3 things could kill you fast in that world: cold, starvation, and predators. And cold usually won first, because cold doesn't wait for you to get careless. It just takes fingers, then feet, then the will to keep moving. But here's the thing. Early humans weren't defenseless. Fire came first. Evidence from sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa suggests controlled fire use going back roughly 1 million years. And by the time Homo sapiens and Neanderthals were both roaming Ice Age Eurasia, fire wasn't a luxury and it was infrastructure. Hearths, banked coals, fire carried between camps like a torch relay across generations. Lose the flame in the wrong season, and you didn't just lose warmth. You lost the ability to cook, to see predators at night, to keep the group together after dark. Now here's the part nobody talks about. Fire alone doesn't get you through a Siberian winter. You need a second skin. And that second skin came from something a lot of people assume was simple, just wearing furs. Here's the myth, that ancient humans threw a hide over their shoulders like a cape and called it a day. The reality is far more advanced. Archaeologist Olga Sofer, studying sites in the former Soviet Union, found impressions of woven plant fibers on fired clay dating back over 25,000 years, evidence of actual tailoring, not draping. And at Denisova Cave in Siberia, researchers uncovered a bone needle with a drilled eye dated to roughly 50,000 years old. That's not a blanket. That's a sewing kit. Fitted clothing, sleeves, layers, sealed seams, was likely the real technology that let modern humans push into Arctic Eurasia while other hominins stayed south. Let that sink in. A needle is one of the reasons you exist, but sewing hides only gets you so far when the hides run out. And here's where the story stops being about ingenuity and starts being about desperation. Let's talk about what happened. When the food disappeared, cold doesn't just kill directly, it starves you slowly. Because plants stop growing, herds migrate, and every calorie becomes a war. In this kind of world, choices got made that we don't like to say out loud. At sites like Moulin-Gercy in France, researcher Alban de Fleur and colleagues published findings in Science back in 1999 showing cut marks on Neanderthal bones consistent with defleshing. The same butchery marks found on deer bones, from the same layer. Not a symbolic ritual, practical butchery. At El Cedron Cave in Spain, a roughly 49,000-year-old Neanderthal site studied extensively by paleoanthropologist Antonio Rosas, researchers found similar evidence across multiple individuals, men, women, and children, all showing signature marks of processing for consumption. Was this always about hunger? Not necessarily. Some researchers argue certain cases may reflect ritual rather than starvation. But in a cold, resource-collapsed environment, the line between the two gets thin fast. When the alternative is your whole group dying together, the ancient calculus wasn't cruelty. It was arithmetic. Here's where it gets interesting, though, because starvation wasn't the only silent killer in the cold. There was another decision, quieter and in some ways darker, that ancient groups faced over and over again. What do you do with a mouth you can't feed? Anthropological and ethnographic research on cold-adapted foraging societies, including work compiled by researchers studying circumpolar groups such as the historical Inuit and Chukchi, documents something brutal but consistent. In extreme famine winters, infanticide and, in some recorded cases, the abandonment of elderly members who could no longer travel, functioned as survival mechanisms of last resort. This wasn't universal and it wasn't casual. It was rare, agonized, and typically only surfaced when literally every other option, rationing, migration, appeals to neighboring groups, had already failed. Think about that for a second. Somewhere, a person had to decide who eats and who doesn't, knowing exactly what the doesn't meant. It's easy to sit here in a heated room and call that monstrous. And in a way it was. But it's worth remembering, for what it's worth, that these decisions weren't made lightly by people who didn't care. They were made by people who cared so much about the group's survival that they were willing to carry the worst decision of their lives so the rest could see spring. Now here's the part nobody talks about. And it's the flip side of all this darkness. Humans also did something almost unbearably tender in response to the exact same pressures. At Sungir, a roughly 34,000-year-old site in Russia, excavated under archaeologist Otto Bader and later analyzed extensively by paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkhaus, researchers found the burial of two children, laid head to head, covered in thousands of painstakingly carved ivory beads that would have taken, by some estimates, thousands of hours of labor to produce. In a world where a single winter could wipe out half a group, someone still spent an almost unthinkable number of hours honoring two dead children instead of using that time to hunt, sow, or gather firewood. So picture the contradiction. The same cold that pushed people toward defleshing bones and impossible choices about the old and the young also pushed them toward acts of devotion that took thousands of hours to complete. Cruelty and tenderness, born from the exact same crisis. Quick aside, imagine explaining to your ancient ancestors that your version of winter survival prep is complaining about the thermostat and ordering a heated blanket off an app in 4 minutes. They spent their entire lives around this problem. You solve it before your coffee finishes brewing. But here's the thing about shelter. Because clothing and fire weren't enough on their own, you needed a structure that could actually hold heat against an ice age wind. And when trees were scarce on the open steppe, ancient humans turned to the biggest resource lying around, the dead. At Mazirich in Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered structures built from mammoth bones, skulls stacked as foundations, tusks arched as doorframes dating back roughly 15,000 years. These weren't decorative. They were engineered windbreaks, using the skeletal remains of animals that likely died naturally or were hunted communally over generations, because a single mammoth could supply materials for one dwelling that a family group could occupy for years. A Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dated to roughly 26,000 years ago, archaeologists also found evidence some researchers interpret as an early wolf-to-dog transitional skull, suggesting that survival in the cold wasn't just about killing animals. It was also sometimes about domesticating them into allies against the same cold that threatened everyone. Here's where the myth-busting really matters, though. There's a popular assumption that Ice Age humans were constantly one bad week away from extinction, fragile, barely scraping by. The reality, based on sites like Dolní Věstonice, tells a different story. These weren't scattered survivors. They were organized communities with kilns for firing clay figurines, complex burial rituals, and cooperative mammoth hunting that required real planning and division of labor. Fragile people don't build ceramic technology for art. Fragile. People are too busy trying not to die. They weren't just surviving the cold. They were adapting faster than the cold could kill them. Now here's where this stops being a list of grim facts and starts being something bigger. Because underneath every hard choice and the cannibalism, the impossible decisions about who lives, the thousands of hours spent burying two children in beads, there's a single thread. Every single one of those choices, dark or tender, was an act of group-level thinking. Ancient humans in the cold weren't surviving as individuals. Nobody survives an Ice Age winter alone. They survived because they belonged to something. A group willing to make brutal calculations for its own continuation, and also willing to spend impossible hours honoring its dead. That tension between ruthless practicality and deep emotional investment in each other isn't a contradiction in human nature. It might actually be the engine of it. The same psychological wiring that let a group make an agonizing survival decision is the wiring that let them grieve, bond, and cooperate well enough to make it to the next generation at all. Cold didn't just test human bodies. It tested and shaped human social bonds and arguably built the emotional architecture we still carry today. So let's put the whole timeline together. Around 1 million years ago, early hominins at sites like Wonderwork Cave were already taming fire. By around 100,000 years ago, groups at Mula Gersi were making impossible decisions about food in the depths of hardship. By roughly 50,000 years ago, someone at Denisova Cave was threading a bone needle that would help clothe a species well enough to conquer the Arctic. By 34,000 years ago, a community at Sungir was burying 2 children in beads it took millennia of skill to produce. And by 15,000 years ago, families at Mezherich were building homes out of mammoth bones on a treeless, frozen steppe. Every time you put on a jacket with a stitched seam, you're using the same basic idea as that Denisova needle. Every time you build a fire, gather with people you love on a cold night, or bury someone you lost with more care than seems practical, you're echoing a survival strategy that's tens of thousands of years old. The cold didn't just almost kill your ancestors. It built the parts of you that still know how to care for people, and the parts of you that, if truly pushed to the edge, still know how to survive. Maybe that's the real takeaway. Humanity wasn't forged by comfort. It was forged by winters that should have ended us, and didn't, because our ancestors were willing to do whatever it took, in both directions dark and tender, to keep the fire burning one more night.